If you're watching this, chances are you've already watched my Parkour Civilization video. And if you did, I just want to say thank you. The video performed way better than I expected, and the fact that you took the time out of your day to watch an hour-long analysis discussing the sociological implications of a fictional dystopia set in Minecraft is kinda crazy to me. But the good kind of crazy. Even though I went pretty in depth with my analysis, there's still some things that I wanted to talk about but didn't make the final cut. This video is an opportunity for me to explore these ideas but in a more chill and relaxed way compared to my previous analysis. I also want to use this video as an opportunity to take the time to respond to viewer comments. I was blown away by your insight and depth of knowledge. You guys wrote some really good stuff and I'm gonna do my best to respond to them. But if you happen to stumble upon this video without first watching my Parkour Civilization analysis, I recommend you guys watch it first before this one. It gives you the proper context needed to fully understand the things we're about to get into. But if you want to be confused, that's chill too. Hopefully this video will still make sense to you. Like what I mentioned in my original video, the world of Parkour Civilization is surprisingly deep and touches on real-life social systems and philosophies. With that said, a comment I kept on getting a lot was if Evbo intended for Parkour Civilization to be this deep in the first place. And honestly, probably not. What I will say is that I think people, and artists especially, are able to make profound things without intending to in the first place. But there is a thread in this series that connects to reality. Parkour Civilization is clearly a parody of YA dystopias like The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, the other one, and these YA dystopias draw from how real regimes have oppressed people throughout history. While never intending to be a fully fleshed out society with a working economy, there are still aspects of Parkour Civilization that reflect how the real world has and continues to govern itself. One aspect of Parkour Civilization that I wanted to dive deeper into but didn't have the time is the Temple of Parkour. I mentioned in my previous video how there's a metaphysical reality in Parkour Civilization, and to me, the Temple of Parkour is a symbol of this. As a quick refresher, the Society of Parkour Civilization is divided into 4 classes: Parkour Noob, Parkour Pro, Parkour Master, and Parkour Champion. Classes reside in separate physical layers in Parkour Civilization, with the Temple of Parkour connecting the levels above and below you. When you enter, parkour courses lead players up to the next layer, with each course becoming more difficult the higher you climb up. It's only by completing an obstacle course do players earn the right to live on a new level and hold a new class identity. So the Temple of Parkour is quite literally a social ladder that allows its citizens to climb out of their class. But in addition to being a mode for social mobility, the Temple of Parkour serves as Parkour Civilization's world tree. In ancient folklore and religions, world trees supported the heavens above and the earth below. A popular example would be Yggdrasil in ancient Norse cosmology. So when you hear this, you can clearly understand how the Temple of Parkour fits the definition of a world tree, with the temple literally supporting the layers of Parkour Civilization's world. And also, world trees don't necessarily have to be trees. They can be presented as different kinds of plants, buildings, and structures, which includes temples. The world tree is known as the Axis Mundi, or world axis. According to McCrae Iliad, which I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. According to him, the Axis Mundi is known as the center of the world and is considered a sacred area. Symbolically, the Axis Mundi serves as a bridge, a link between what is known as the microcosm, the earthly realm, and the macrocosm, or the heavenly realm. The microcosm is a small, self-sustaining system that represents the structures and principles of a larger system, i.e. the macrocosm. The microcosm can be a person, community, or an environment. Each of these microcosms serve as a reflection of the universe, or the macrocosm. This context helps us better understand the significance of the Temple of Parkour. I mean, think about it. What is considered sacred in Parkour Civilization? It's parkour. In this world, there's a temple, a place of worship, dedicated to the practice of moving from point A to point B. And to reiterate, parkour isn't just an economic system or a form of social mobility. It's a way of life. It's a pillar of their metaphysical reality. This is how Parkour Civilization operates at a fundamental level. What binds this world together is the freedom of movement, to ascend and surpass yourself. The one to embody this metaphysical reality fully is none other than our hero Evbo. By the end of the Parkour Civ series, Evbo ascends the tower and becomes the new Parkour God.
I will inherit your power? What power is that?
You will become Parkour.
I'm sorry, did you just say become Parkour? That doesn't make any sense.
I'm a godly figure that rarely shows up. I'm not supposed to make any sense.
Evbo becomes Parkour, embodying absolute freedom. He's no longer bound to the obstacles that stand in his way, but instead has the power to make his own blocks and forge his own path. Evbo's ascension isn't just a rags to riches story. It's a journey of moving from the earthly realm to the heavenly realm through the temple of parkour. Now, here's where things get even crazier, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but I want to provide an additional theory. As I mentioned earlier, world trees can be different kinds of plants or buildings. So, following that train of thought, according to different religions and disciplines, people can also be world trees. So my crazy crackpot theory is that in a way, I think that by ascending the Temple of Parkour, Evbo himself becomes a world tree. He's the bridge between the earthly realm and the heavenly realm of parkour civilization. Am I being way out of line here? I mean, the dude becomes the new Parkour God, embodying the essence of parkour itself. He represents the metaphysical reality that binds the world of parkour civilization together. Now, if Evbo decides to continue with the Parkour Civilization series, I think it'd be interesting to explore his new role as Parkour God and its potential danger. Evbo's journey to godhood reminds me of Dostoevsky's concept of the man-god and Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch. Both Dostoevsky and Nietzsche lived during a transitional period between the end of the Romantic era and the beginning of the modern era. Both recognized how the religious and moral foundations of Western society were eroding, and their writing reflected the culture's changing attitude. In his book Demons, Dostoevsky writes two passages that describe his man-god archetype. The new god is self-will. With endless freedom, there's endless despotism. The Enlightenment has called into question the reality and the need of an all-powerful God. Dostoevsky believed that to do away with God was to do away with all that he held together in society. The result is man having to take his place, the man-god. For Dostoevsky, the man-god is a nightmare. With no divine standard to hold us accountable and being burdened with absolute freedom, Dostoevsky believed that this world would succumb to nihilism and chaos. Nature abhors a vacuum. The absence of God paves the way for dangerous people and ideologies to fill the void. But they're incapable of replacing divine authority. This man-god will eventually self-destruct. Nietzsche has come to a similar conclusion as Dostoevsky, albeit in the complete opposite direction. He's the one that famously penned the words, "God is dead." And like Dostoevsky, Nietzsche lamented the existential and cultural crisis the death of God would ensue. But what makes Nietzsche different from Dostoevsky is that he believed that the man-god isn't something to run away from. The Übermensch is his version of the man-god. It's the grounded ideal humanity should strive toward. The Übermensch embraces the reality of life fully, with all its joys and dangers. Instead of abiding by the moral standards imparted to us by God and the church, the Übermensch creates his own values to live by. These values serve the Übermensch's pursuit of self-actualization, of excellence. The Übermensch recognizes that to live is to contend with life. He's willing to confront and overcome the barriers within himself and the world in order to achieve his own goals. If God is dead, must we ourselves not become God simply to appear worthy to it? Man is a bridge, not an end. Nietzsche believed that the death of God will plunge the world into darkness. But even still, he believed that humanity has the capacity to create their own light and guide themselves out of the abyss. So, what does all of this have to do with parkour civilization again? To reiterate, Evbo's adventure is really an ascension. In my opinion, he fulfills Nietzsche's ideal of the Übermensch. Despite everything that was thrown against Evbo, he still managed to find a way to persevere and overcome the challenges presented to him. By the end of his journey, he not only becomes the parkour champion, but becomes the parkour god, and with this new title, creates a world suited to his values. Now, this opens up a lot of opportunities story-wise. If Evbo achieves godhood, does that mean other people in parkour civilization can also become the parkour god? What happens if they have the same powers as him, but instead of choosing to use them for good, they choose evil? What would be really interesting to explore is if Evbo becomes corrupted by his power. Instead of being the Ubermensch, Evbo instead devolves into madness and becomes Dostoevsky's man god. I'm just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall here, guys, but let me know in the comments below what you think of my ideas. Speaking of comments, let's go read some right now. Despite what I said earlier about Evbo creating his own values, a comment I kept on getting was if Evbo actually changed anything in parkour civilization. And if he did change anything, was this a good thing or a bad thing? Statue writes, my favorite part is how Evbo, even after everything he's been through, given the power to restructure parkour civilization, didn't abolish the class system. It shows that he's a flawed individual. And while he did make the social divide more fair, he still kept a social hierarchy that kept him in power. On the final stretch, his biggest weakness was revealed, that not being any specific jump, but his unwillingness to question the status quo that made him suffer in the first place. And I love Lex Tater Tot's response to this. You could say the one leap he could never make, the jump he could never 360, was mental, a logical leap to a world without parkour. And they continue on to say, for real though, it's very emblematic of how people envision solutions to capitalism's problems that are still capitalism. Now, from these comments, we hear from people about how Evbo didn't go far enough with his reforms. But there are some who disagree with dismantling the parkour system. Lord Tiff comments, the entire point behind his struggle was that there was never a chance for anyone to come to the top. Only false hope of one day rising up the ranks. And he moved to change so that it was possible. What's the issue of fixing the problem of a structure that allows people to put in the effort to have a better life? Lord Tiff's comments echoes the thoughts of many who believe that dismantling the parkour system is unnecessary, and that the changes Evbo did implement are actually a net positive. And from that, Enchanted Hero adds an interesting perspective to the whole debate on whether Evbo should or shouldn't uproot the current parkour system. Their comment really made me think. They write, the solution to a broken hierarchy is a proper one, not the destruction of it. And in this sense, the story shows how exactly a hero may do this. By going through the hierarchy from the bottom up, trying to understand how it works, and by seeing all the corruption and evil of it, but not letting it corrupt and claim you, but confronting this evil and exposing it, you get the crown. And as you purge the top of this hierarchy, the rest of it gets purified as a consequence of higher layers affecting the lower levels. And with this, you get a functioning hierarchy that can be called good. You don't get paradise or utopia. This is important because to some extent, the solution of the story critiques the utopian vision of many modern thinkers. Utopia itself isn't desirable due to how the world is structured. Man, this is such a profound comment and there's so much to unpack from it. So from what I understand, Enchanted Hero is telling us that hierarchy isn't inherently bad. Hierarchy is natural. It's embedded into our world. What's wrong isn't hierarchy, but people who misuse their status to oppress others, and how the lower class are being treated unfairly and aren't given the opportunity to move up in society. But there was one commenter who shared a similar concern I mentioned previously. Jiantang Nguyen writes, how long will Evbo's reign last? Maybe Evbo did bring what people wanted, but it doesn't change the fact that there must be someone to make it true. Evbo will bear the responsibility of such promises until he can't anymore. And there will be people better than him, and they'll ultimately reverse the system he has built to the same unfair system as before. The limitation of him is that he couldn't think of a system that could sustain and maintain such promises, and as such, he's stuck with the very same beginning. I can't pronounce this name. Tokmurk writes that they can't help but think someday parkour civilization will go back to being evil. It's just a matter of time for the cycle to repeat because he never broke it. So both Nguyen and Tokmurk address the main issues with Evbo's reforms. Evbo is sustaining a system that is fated to collapse on itself. If anyone can become a parkour champion, and presumably others can be parkour gods, what's gonna stop somebody from undoing everything Evbo has built and making things worse? We've seen how close this was in becoming a reality with Clown Pierce. And speaking of Clown Pierce, Squidward Art has a brilliant comment about the parkour villain. He writes, if we look beyond the villains, there's still the system itself. Even the well-meaning Evbo, upon becoming the champion, didn't change it. Yeah, he made it much less cruel and meritocratic, but still classist, and equalizing the worth of the person to his parkour skill. And why wouldn't Evbo believe so? That's what he knew his whole life, and he achieved great things with his parkour. That's just natural for him. Yet far worse, he saw no problem with keeping the unlimited power, and the fact that a villain one day will inevitably win, and build the unfair society once more, or even worse. He had the power to change the world, but not question it. Bruh, Squidward art coming in with the heat, man, the bars. He probably felt like the Blackbeard meme when he wrote this comment. Evbo had the power to change the world, but not question it. So good, man. I'll continue. Villains and heroes come and go, but the system stays, shaping everyone within it. Paradoxically, the closest we got to ending the system was when one of its radical products destroyed it. The society is based on the fact that a person's worth is solely based on his parkour. Clown Pierce merely takes it to the logical conclusion that if your parkour is better than others, they don't deserve to live. Without divine intervention, the system would end itself. Now, with divine power, Evbo could keep the status quo indefinite, but I hope by making his own jumps, he'll come to realize that others should be allowed to do so as well. Many people believe that Evbo is focusing on a short-term solution. In reality, the system of parkour itself is oppressive. For better or for worse, rulers come and go, but the system remains the same. And with this, the opportunity to bring ruin. Now, I want to bring up a comment that offers a good rebuttal against the dismantling of the parkour system. Listen to what LinkJam has to say. Evbo didn't change the system because it would cause too much chaos, disorder. This is the only way of life anybody has ever known. Nobody would know what to do because the only thing they've ever known would be gone. It would cause more harm than good. As for the class system, well, same deal. Too much drastic change, too fast. Alpha Pizza Dog, and I love your username by the way, continues the same thought by writing, I think Evbo's restructuring of parkour society makes sense from an in-universe perspective. Parkour is all he's known. He used to believe in a world where parkour wasn't necessary, but he knows it was just an illusion. Even if the thought had to come into existence from somewhere, it's a thought that seems divorced from reality at this point. And honestly, I don't think those living in parkour society would be able to accept such an immediate change to their life. And to cap it off, Superstar Slam writes, Evbo has no concept of a civilization without parkour or without a class system. He could never remove them as he had no concepts to replace them with. These comments are the closest to my opinion on Evbo's actions and reforms. We have the benefit of looking at Evbo as an outside observer. We have experiences and knowledge of how society can order itself that's completely alien to Evbo and his world. So I think we should cut Evbo some slack. He was just doing what he thought was best with the little he knows. And also, he might change his mind later down the road. Another interesting point these comments brought up was how much chaos radical change can bring. Beast Mode writes, personally, I think the existence of a class system is required in Evbo's utopic dream. Outright removing parkour likely would do more harm than good, as no one in the civilization knows how to function without it. Instead, parkour requirements should slowly be removed over the course of a few hundred years. If Evbo can't conceive of a world beyond parkour, how much more the citizens of parkour civilization? This issue reminds me yet again of the dilemma Dostoevsky and Nietzsche were facing during their times. And I'm not the only one to make this connection. Dilrich writes, the question, will you jump for the beef or merely get the chicken, is really tantamount to the crucial question of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Will you transcend morality or conform to society? Both Dostoevsky and Nietzsche believed that freedom is a burden man must carry. To Nietzsche, the Übermensch embraces freedom, seeing chaos as potential to exercise his will on the world and himself. But the vast majority of people, the herd as he called them, would rather live comfortably under the yoke of society's values. The herd called themselves good, when in reality, they're just obedient. For Dostoevsky, freedom of choice is what makes us human. We define ourselves. We decide how to act. It's all our responsibility. Freedom entails discomfort and even chaos. Chaos within ourselves and the world around us. But this chaos can be a crucible for personal growth and moral development. If Evbo decides to dismantle the parkour system, chaos is inevitable. But maybe, just maybe, through the chaos, the people of parkour civilization will become better and stronger. Now, Another topic that was brought up in the comments section was people debating what kind of society parkour civilization actually is. Is it feudalist, is it capitalist, or is it something totally different? In my original video, I described parkour civilization as a hybrid society, more specifically a feudal Orwellian totalitarian state. To me, parkour civilization exhibited the oppression and surveillance of the one-party state found in 1984, but mixed with the social structure of a feudal society. When I come to this conclusion, I want to remind everyone again that I'm not an expert on civics and economics. I'm just a dude taking the little that he's learned and applying it to what hopefully is an entertaining video. So with that said, your comments gave me a lot of food for thought. Get Around writes, parkour civilization could be a metaphor for what happened during the Industrial Revolution. Before workers' rights, welfare laws, and unions, it was still functionally impossible to advance under early capitalism. It's the stripping back of these that's giving modern times such little upwards mobility compared to the post-Great Depression 20th century.
Yeah, let's get these baby villagers working in time of my scale like a good old thousands of science.
Anyway, Dalmi adds, parkour civilization is dystopic in a way that I've never seen before. I see it as a post-scarcity Randian society, where the only commodity is the authority granted to you by your level of skill and an arbitrary ability. Whenever I see reactions to parkour civilization, they always get stuck on why parkour is a currency. But it makes sense when you consider that if resources are plentiful, the only thing of value is being able to make someone jump when you say jump. So what I understand of Dalmi's comment is that parkour civilization is the result of what would happen if a society applied Ayn Rand's objective philosophy to the fullest extent. What you're left with is a society of radical inequality, without any form of collective cohesion or power. Greenteeth goes into greater detail on the deep classism present in parkour civilization. They write, the prisoners are nothing but guinea pigs. The noobs are unable to break blocks or sprint. The pros are given the ability of regular people. The masters have water buckets. The champion has infinite food and health, where the only way to beat him is to kill him. And the parkour god was given the greatest reward of all, to leave the chain and escape parkour civilization. Even the farm scene with Evbo's mentioned that the animals are tested because the meat of animals who make the course enhance the pro's parkour ability shows that people are preoccupied with boosting the rich rather than uplifting the poor, and a well that flows upward cannot sustain. They continue to write, another thing I thought about was that any given level can't see the level above them, only dirt. This both adds to the theme of hierarchical ignorance and plants the idea in their head that once they level up, they won't have to parkour to survive. I've come to a similar conclusion as Greenteeth. All the tools needed to improve your parkour are only given to those in the upper class, reinforcing stratification. And the fact that you can't see the layer above you represents class ignorance. It gives the illusion that things will be better once you move up in society, but the reality is that you still need to struggle to survive. That's why the ending of parkour civilization is so profound. When Evbo reaches the top of the Temple of Parkour, all he sees is a clear blue sky, a future undefined, with endless possibilities, a blank canvas that gives him the opportunity to craft the future he desires. Zeppi writes, personally, I thought parkour civilization was an allegory for how we expend and risk our bodies, and the direct harm we cause by performing labor. In parkour civilization, the exchange of labor is taken one conceptual step further by risking your body directly, as opposed to expending it through productive actions. Even in a society where we have such an abundance of resources to let everybody live, eat, and sleep comfortably, we still work ourselves to exhaustion to get access to the bare minimum. Newbiness has come to a similar conclusion and writes, the real nutty thing to me is that getting out of bed in the noob cast is the same amount of labor and carries the same amount of risk as jumping for the chicken. But like traveling, it's completely unpaid labor. Think about how far some people have to drive to get to work. Think about how people are expected to trim their beards and hair, put on prim and presentable uniforms, and keep up the facade of cheerfulness to keep their jobs. Think about the fact that some people get paid good money to drive around, or to style people's hair, or to pick out their clothes. Now think about how many people are not paid to do all those things before they even get to the part where they do what they're paid for. Both these commenters provide a great comparison to how the danger of getting out of bed and of merely existing in parkour civilization mirrors how laborers in the real world expose themselves to potential harm while working and when preparing to get to work. Before reading this comment, I hadn't even thought about the fact that there are people out there who get paid to drive and to style people's hair, but there are millions of those who do both of these things as a necessity to prepare for their real job, but they aren't properly compensated for it. Now, modern classical music disagrees with my assessment of parkour civilization being more of a feudal society. He writes, "Parkour civilization is very clearly a literal representation of the symbolic processes of capitalism. Under feudalism, there is no hope of upward mobility, and as such, the psychological mechanisms engineered since the Industrial Revolution to maintain order in society are also not present. Because rules under feudalism were very strictly adhered to, there was usually very little day-to-day oversight of the ordinary person. On top of this, due to the fact that the majority of people were not yet alienated to the means of production, as in they farmed their own food, mended their own clothes, etc., there was no requirement for more abstract measures of control. If you don't work under feudalism, you starve. You're the one responsible for your own bread, and you work when there's work and don't when there isn't. The rhythms of work in parkour society, regular daily schedules, and the necessity of work regardless of its immediate necessity is far more reminiscent of capitalism, as is the illusory promise of advancement within the society. The devices of control within the parkour society are far more relatable to modern people than they ever would be to a medieval peasant. I think you confused a society having a rigidly enforced class structure for a society practicing feudalism. Remember, capitalism is also class-based. The difference being just which class holds and exercises power. Under feudalism, this is the aristocratic nobility, and under capitalism, it's the industrial bourgeoisie. I want to thank modern classical music for writing this because this was really well written and well thought out. I'm gonna have to mull it over to fully comprehend his argument. But either way, I think this disagreement reveals the difficulty of trying to define what kind of society parkour civilization actually is. Look, I agree that parkour civilization is infected with similar social ills found in capitalism. And it's true that compared to the average medieval peasant, modern people can probably relate more to the social issues of parkour civilization. But with all that said, I just don't know if it would be accurate to describe parkour civilization as a capitalist society. Maybe capitalist adjacent? I don't know. But to me, parkour civilization doesn't really fit the definition of, if I'm being honest, my limited understanding of capitalism. There's no private ownership of the means of production, no profit motive, and no free market that incentivizes competition. Dalami, I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm like just butchering your name, dude. Dalami is able to articulate some of my thoughts better by commenting, I think certain problems arise when you try to draw metaphors from parkour civilization to real life. Like, are the pros the working class or are they the petite bourgeoisie? Ultimately, these labels don't make sense in parkour civilization. It doesn't have a capitalist mode of production. Everything is essentially free if you can demonstrate that you're skilled enough to deserve it. Food is literally free if you're a pro. If the pros are the working class, then what would the noobs be? They have the right to buy and even own property, but are outright banned from engaging in any production of value in a material sense. The noobs as a class just don't correlate to anything we see in real life, and seemingly only exist to be an underclass upon which the pros can exert their authority. And to be honest, I kind of started to lose focus when Evbo got to the master stage. But I don't know, they don't really seem to rely on the labor of the pros. When Evbo didn't do his task, it felt like the problem was insubordination, more than a loss of value. Parkour civilization doesn't really tackle economics. It just kind of works. And if parkour civilization is uninterested in that question, I'm not going to bother with it either. I think Dalami's comment really hits the nail on the head in explaining how unrealized the economy of parkour civilization is. The structures set in place are arbitrary and don't really fulfill a practical role except in maintaining the oppressive order set by the parkour champion. Man, that was a lot. I learned so much from reading your comments, guys. Thank you again for taking the time and effort to express your thoughts on my crazy video. But if you guys want to be updated on when my next video comes out, subscribe and hit that bell to be notified. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. It lets the algorithm know it's worth watching. Also, if you want to support me as a creator, consider becoming a channel member or by joining my Patreon. Thank you guys again for watching. Until next time, peace out.